Did you know that back in the 60s and 70s, GM pumped out some of the coolest muscle cars ever made? While legends like the Camaro and Chevelle get all the attention, GM was cranking out a bunch of other muscle cars that flew under the radar. In this video, we're about to rediscover 10 of the weirdest and coolest GM muscle cars ever made. So stay tuned. Number 10, the 1974 Chevy Laguna. We'll start with the 74 Laguna, and this car was built with aerodynamics in mind. It was actually used in NASCAR, so that tells you how serious Chevy was about making this thing fast. Most came with a 454 cubic inch V8 engine under the hood, which gave it some serious power, and it was paired with what they called the colonnade styling. That's just a fancy way of saying it had these beefy pillars around the windows that made it look tough but also help with safety. The Laguna was pretty sleek for its time, but for some reason it didn't get as much love as the Chevelles or Camaros. Now, if you're lucky enough to find one today, you're probably looking at prices between $20,000 to $35,000 depending on condition. And I gotta say, I had the chance to drive one last year, and man, that V8 roar, it's just something else. It's like being transported back to the 70s. Number 9, the 1974 Pontiac Lemans. Next up, we've got the 74 Lemans. Now, you might have seen this car pop up in Moonshiners or some classic movies, and for good reason. It's a solid ride. The Lemans came with a variety of engine options, but the real star of the show was the 400 cubic inch V8. This thing was made for people who wanted a little bit of everything: good looks, comfort, and a touch of performance. But what's funny about the Lemans is that it was kind of a sleeper car. It didn't scream muscle car like a GTO did, but it definitely had the heart of one. I remember seeing one at a car show a few years ago, and the owner told me he picked it up for around $15,000. Prices these days are pretty reasonable for a classic. Expect to pay anywhere from $12,000 to $25,000 depending on the condition. Number 8, 1975 Buick Century GS. Alright, now we're going to talk about the 1975 Buick Century GS. This car was a bit of an oddball because it mixed luxury with muscle. Buick wasn't exactly known for wild muscle cars, but the Century GS tried to change that. You could get it with a 455 cubic inch V8, and let me tell you, that engine, it could really move. What I loved about this car was the interior. It's like sitting in a couch on wheels. You've got plush seats, wood trim, and all the fancy stuff you'd expect from Buick, but then you put your foot down and that big V8 roars to life. If you're hunting for one of these today, expect to pay anywhere from $18,000 to $30,000, depending on how well it's been kept. I once saw one at a local auction, and trust me, it's one of those cars that looks even better in person. Number 7, the 1973 Oldsmobile Cutlass Hearst. Now, here's one of my personal favorites: the 1973 Oldsmobile Cutlass Hearst / Olds. Now, if you're into special editions, this one's for you. It came with performance upgrades that made it stand out. We're talking a 455 cubic inch V8 engine, the signature Hearst shifter, and some really unique paint jobs. One of the coolest things about this car is that it was a true collaboration between Oldsmobile and Hearst, a company known for making some of the best performance parts. The Hearst Olds feels more like a muscle car built for the track, even though most people probably just use them for weekend drives. Today, prices are hovering around $25,000 to $40,000, and if you get a chance to drive one, I'd say do it. The handling's surprisingly tight for a car of its size, and that V8 just pulls like crazy. Number 6, 1976 Chevrolet Chevelle SE. Now this next one's a rare gem, the 76 Chevelle SE. Only 50 of these were made, so finding one's like hitting the classic car lottery. Most came with a 350 cubic inch V8, which gave it a decent amount of power, but what really set it apart were the special edition badging and custom interior. The SE was Chevrolet's attempt at making a more premium version of the Chevelle, and honestly, they did a pretty good job. The interior was decked out with all sorts of upgrades like fancier seats and trim. As for the price, well, because it's so rare, they can go for up to $50,000 if you can even find one. I've only ever seen one in person, and trust me, it's a head turner. Number 5, the 1977 Pontiac Can-Am. Now let's talk about the 77 Can-Am, one of the coolest muscle cars Pontiac ever made. One of its standout features is the iconic shaker hood scoop. Now it's called that because when you rev the engine, the scoop literally shakes. It's a sight to see. The Can-Am came with a powerful 400 cubic inch V8 engine, giving it serious muscle to match its aggressive looks. What really made the Can-Am special was its unique design. It wasn't just the engine that turned heads, it had bold graphics and that eye-catching shaker scoop, making sure you knew this car meant business. Unfortunately, Pontiac only produced the Can-Am for 1 year, so finding one today is pretty rare. But if you do, it's like striking gold. Prices for a 1977 Pontiac Can-Am can range from $20,000 to $35,000 depending on the condition. Number 4, the 1973 Buick Grand Sport Stage 1. Now, next up, the 73 Buick Grand Sport Stage 1. Again, Buick might not be the first brand that comes to mind when you think muscle cars, but the Stage 1 was the real deal. With a massive 455 cubic inch V8, this car was all about torque, and tons of it. You'd get this deep rumbling sound that just screamed power. It's a bit of a sleeper too, with a more subdued look than some of the flashier muscle cars of the time, but trust me, when you press the pedal, it moves. Prices for a good condition Stage 1 are around $30,000 to $45,000, but they can go higher if it's in mint condition. I've always liked the understated design. It's one of those cars that surprises you with its performance. Number 3, the 1974 Oldsmobile 442. Alright, time to talk about the 442, a car that really should have been more popular than it was. This thing had everything you'd want in a muscle car: aggressive looks, powerful performance, and a roaring engine under the hood. It came with a 455 cubic inch V8 engine, which means it packs some serious muscle. And when you press the gas, you could feel the raw power of that big V8 ready to tear up the road. Now, despite all that, the 442 didn't get as much attention as some of its competitors, like the GTO or Chevelle. It's kind of an underdog in the muscle car world. The styling was aggressive and bold, but that unmistakable 442 badge, that told you this car was no joke. And the performance, well, let's just say it could keep up with the best of them, even though it didn't get the spotlight it deserved. Number 2, the 1975 Chevrolet Monza 2-2. Now, this is one of those unique muscle cars that doesn't quite fit the typical muscle car mold, but the Chevrolet Monza 2-2 still packs a punch. Unlike the big, bulky muscle cars that ruled the roads in the 60s and early 70s, the Monza 2-2 is smaller and lighter. But don't let its size fool you. It came with a 262 cubic inch V8 engine, so even though it's compact, it still had some serious power. Chevrolet introduced the Monza as a response to the fuel crisis of the mid-70s, when people started looking for cars that were a little more fuel efficient but still sporty. Prices for a Monza 2-2 are surprisingly affordable. You can find them for around $10,000 to $20,000. It's one of those cars that's perfect if you're looking to get into the muscle car scene without breaking the bank. And number 1, the 1976 Pontiac Ventura Sprint. Last but not least, we've got the 1976 Pontiac Ventura Sprint. This car is all about balance. It had a 350 cubic inch V8 engine, but was also pretty lightweight compared to other muscle cars of the time, which made it surprisingly quick. The Ventura Sprint was kind of a sleeper in the muscle car world, but it gained a bit of a following here in recent years. You can pick one up for around $12,000 to $25,000, which isn't bad for a classic like this. I've always thought the Ventura was underrated. It's got the looks, the performance, and the price that make it a great entry-level classic. Hey, there you have it, the 10 forgotten GM muscle cars that are just too weird to ignore. Now, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share with your fellow car lovers, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more awesome car content.